Hey, what's going on? This is Jay Farrell. You listening to the Hard Knock Life podcast. What up, though?
Well, it's the NOC in full color, you see me? The Hard Knock Life, comics, movies, and TV, yeah. Pop culture with a different
Welcome to Hard Knock Life. I'm Keith Chow. We are breaking our hiatus because the new year comes and so does the news. I know we don't cover comics as much on the site anymore because no one's got time to read comics, and it's probably why we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about. Last week, really two huge, shocking pieces of news dropped that shook the comics industry to the core. One, the accusations about Neil Gaiman, which we're not going to touch because I don't think we're qualified to talk about that. But the other thing that did happen that also rocked the industry, I do feel qualified to talk about the bankruptcy filing of Diamond Comic Distributors. And the reason I feel confident talking about that is that I am a former employee of Diamond Comic Distributors, and I brought on fellow former employee of Diamond Comic Distributors and one of the OG nerds of color back to the site to talk about our time there. We've come not to praise Diamond but to bury it. Please welcome William Bruce West.
Hey, how's it going?
Has it been the best week ever for Diamond Comics? Is the main question for today.
Diamond Comics hasn't had the West Week ever since like 1996.
So I mean, I'm glad you're here. Welcome to the show. It's been a while. But you were the first person I thought about to talk, about this news because you and I share not only employment history with the company, but I think you and I have a different perspective than most of the comics internet when it comes to the reaction to Diamond's fall. And just to sum it up, the reaction for most comics fans and internet dwellers is Ding Dong, the witch is dead. But I feel a little bit like Glinda at the beginning of Wicked. There was more to Diamond than just the wickedness.
Yes, definitely. I always tell people like I consider myself a Diamond apologist. I even after leaving and after like everyone I knew there left, like I still stick up for it because there's more to it than most people know. Like I have always felt that comics are the only industry that I know of, like somebody's going to correct me, and I hope they do, but that I know of where the consumer is actively trained to hate the distributor. Like think of anything else. Like I did 10 years at Toys R Us and their distributor was Lash Tameron. Nobody on the street knows that. Like if you couldn't find your Bakugan or your Pokemon or whatever thing was famous at the time, you weren't like, oh, Lash Tameron,
Right.
But like comics, people who know nothing about the industry are like, oh yeah, well I know Diamond's bad because the guy who runs my comic shop taught me,
Well,
So,
that I was about to say too, and we're not here to shit on retailers, but I do think part of the Diamond hate comes from, the thing with Toys R Us, your manager of your local Toys R Us isn't really on the internet talking about it and, talking to the customers about how shitty that distributor is. Whereas if you walk into a comic book store, one, you see all the Diamond boxes everywhere, and then you hear the retailer like muttering under his breath about how shitty customer service was or something. You know what I mean? So I think there is a little bit of osmosis happening with the comics fan. And also I think comic book retailers are also big comic book fans themselves. Like they are there's not that like corporate distance from the product that you might see at like a regular retail.
true. And I that's definitely a component of it. And I also think that's why the successful ones are the more corporate ones.
Mm-hmm.
Because the hobbyists, they're too close to the product.
Yeah.
But that's neither here nor there. Diamond, like when I heard the news, it was the kind of deal of like, I think we all knew it would happen one day.
People have been predicting this since you and I were there. Like,
yeah, but it's also kind of like it's like your parents. You watch your parents get older. You know, one day they're not gonna be there, but you always think that one day is further down the road.
right.
One day is gonna come, and it's the same here. You know, it's never the day you expect it to. So
Well,
when
and
they
I think
made that announcement,
to extend that elderly parent analogy is like they caught a cold during COVID, and you're like, ooh, that's a different kind of cold. Like I've seen
yep,
them sick, and this COVID sick is different. So like, and I bring that up because it's not the major reason that they fell, but when Diamond paused operations during COVID, that was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, at least for DC. Because and I think we should step back for folks who, again, Nerds of Color has not covered comics in a minute, so people who are listening to this podcast might be like, "What are you guys talking about?" So, Diamond Comic Distributors was the main distributor of comic books and pop culture merchandise at all the comic book stores. That all there's not that many comic book stores anymore either. That's another problem. But when you walk into a comic book store, all the merchandise that you saw in said comic book store was shipped through Diamond Comic Distributors. The DC books, the Marvel books, the Image books, they were all exclusive to Diamond for decades. And then one by one, those exclusivity deals fell through the wayside, where you had the big two leave, and then the medium two left after. And now all you have left is like Archie Comics and Dynamite, basically.
yeah, yeah.
And, if you've never heard of those comic book companies, that's why Diamond filed for bankruptcy. Did I get anything? I mean, you were in sales, so did I get anything? Did I leave anything out in that description of what Diamond was?
No, not really. I mean, I think, and this is the part that we bring that a lot of folks would know is in terms of relationships. Diamond's relationship to DC was very important. So, like you were saying, going back to COVID, when Diamond decided not to ship anything, and then that led to DC leaving and going to Lunar, that was very monumental going back to the 90s, more inside baseball, and around what was it, 1996,
Mhm.
somewhere around there.
When the market crashed.
Yeah, yeah, but like when Marvel left Diamond to have their own distribution called Heroes World, and Heroes World, I would say surprisingly was unsuccessful because like this is the market hadn't crashed yet, but you still got to think that Marvel was the home of the X-Men. X-Men were printing money even when it was horrible,
Mhm.
but it was like when they left to do Heroes World, in order to survive, Diamond locked DC into that exclusive deal. Like there were more distributors back in that era, and yeah, Diamond kind of acquired many of them, and that's what kind of gained them this like predatorial like reputation basically.
Right.
But the DC deal was just to survive because they thought they were about to get destroyed by the X-Men having their own distributor. That fell through, and we can say that like Marvel came crawling back. Well, from that point on, DC wielded more power with Diamond than Marvel. It became something of a favored nations relationship. So anything Diamond did for Marvel, not only did they have to do for DC, they had to do it better.
Mhm.
So it
Mhm.
was like as long as like everyone was happy and no one was really rocking the boat, like it was that whole like rising tide situation. If Marvel's doing well, at least from a like marketing standpoint, then DC is doing well because they're gonna benefit from that. So DC walking away from that relationship after COVID was symbolic because they had they had this perch that they hadn't necessarily earned. It was really through like loyalty during the bad times. And I have
Right.
found that's how a lot of this industry works, and most industries don't work this way anymore. It's that old school, like verbal agreement, handshake deals, loyalty is rewarded, almost like mafia kind of arrangement, you know? Like there's a lot of stuff that's not on paper but is understood, and none of that really applies anymore. So it's like a whole new world out there.
Well, and I wonder how, like COVID was one of the things, but like you have to remember also DC in that 2020 2021, like Warner Brothers was going through upheaval, and they were cutting back on a lot of the publishing. Like people at DC lost a lot of jobs in
Yeah.
2020 and 2021. So I think part of it's not just the business practices or whatever. I think it's the changing landscape of what comics represents as well. Like you and I came up in the business, and I don't know how you came to Diamond, but like back in the I was working there in the early 2000s. It was almost like it was an honor and a privilege to work at Diamond Comics because you were like, and that's how they brought in and recruited people and paid them not as much money because like at least you're working in comics.
Right,
And I
right.
think that appeal is also not there anymore. I don't think anyone Gen Z and younger gives a shit about working for a comic book company.
No, the ones that do, they're the social media manager and they can do it without going into the building. It's a side hustle
They
for
don't got to
their
move to
real job.
Timonium.
Yeah, yeah, like I mean, it definitely was that whole honor situation. I always wanted to work in toys. Like I always say I went to college to work in toys, but this was before, like now there's toy curriculums, there's like paths. No one knew what to do with me when I was done. So to me, comics were like toy adjacent. It's like I loved comics. It still got Batman and stuff. We'll go do this. But like you said, it is it's the honor to be in the industry, but I took a pay cut. And like this was my second job out of college, so it's like I was already desperate for number one, and then I'm going backwards. Like Diamond caused me to move back home,
Right.
and I commuted 50 miles each way every day for 2 years for the quote unquote honor of working in comics. And I still like missed some of the perks. I kicked myself. This was the beginning of The Walking Dead. And I was like, I'm so sick of zombies. You, you know, like how much I wish I had that number one
Oh
still,
yeah.
but it's
I
like
mean, they were
that,
giving that shit for free. There was racks in the
yes,
offices of like
yes.
random Image comic books because
And that was the perk, it's like they're not paying you anything, but you were constantly getting Image comps or Dynamite comps. There was like 2 times a year where the director of purchasing would open his office and just say, take whatever you
right.
want, because he didn't care about the stuff. It was those things. They sent you to San Diego. I was
Yeah.
never going to San Diego as a civilian. I'm
Right.
never going again. But like Diamond enabled that. So it's like that was there, and you're correct, like that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, and I think it's and I will say before we get into like the nitty gritty about the business or whatever, you mentioned you and I, we're former employees, but I think you still got maybe one or two people that still work. I know at least one or two people who still work there, and or like recently left. And the thing that when I saw the news, it wasn't Ding Dong the Witch is Dead. It wasn't even like finally. It was more like, oh, I'm worried about so and so because that's the thing that people also forget is that these big faceless corporations is made up of hundreds of actual faces.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, I still know some people in like editorial, for previews, but even the ones who recently got laid off, I was getting in fights last week of like there were former people or recently former employees
Hmm.
saying, like, remember, there are people behind these decisions, and people in their comments saying Diamond did it to themselves.
Right.
And I'm like, you think every employee of every company has like control and say in major decisions? Like that's
Yeah.
such a callous just so you can fire your jokes off.
Right.
So it's
Right.
like
Right.
I
Right.
am worried because as we said, nobody's sitting pretty to begin with. It's not like we're talking about, oh, he's gonna lose his mansion now. Like we were struggling. It's like we might have had a nice statue in the background, but like that was we had like 8 roommates, that
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
situation. So
I mean, there is not that it's an equivalent, but I kind of felt that way with some, and it's probably the anonymity of like the internet and just like as you said, the callousness of some folks. But like during the LA wildfires, when some actors were losing their homes, and people were like, "Well, serves you right because you shouldn't be a rich actor," or "Why are you complaining about losing your homes when you've got millions of dollars or whatever?" It's like, damn.
Right, right. Because even
We as a
millions of
society
dollars.
just like don't give a shit anymore
Oh,
about people.
we're cooked. But it's like even if you have the means to rebuild, there's still the things you'll never replace. And
Yeah,
that's what like I took away from it, you know? It's like people are like, "Oh, the my grandfather's like passport from when he came from his home country." You know, things like that. Like those are the things that should bring us all together, but people are just like, "Nah, you're rich, you'll be fine."
right,
And here
right,
it's
right,
like,
right,
"Oh, you work in comics. That's what you get for working for Diamond." Where
right,
else was
right,
I gonna
right.
go? What other distributor was there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's kind of the problem, I guess.
Right, right.
But no, I think there's definitely a lack of compassion when you see people openly cheering about something that's and for what it's worth, I don't want to make it sound like Diamond's gone. Like they filed for Chapter 11. Usually, you do that to try to stay afloat. There will be some version of Diamond that emerges on the other side, but it won't be the Diamond you and I remember
Right,
because
right.
like part of Chapter 11 is having to sell off different assets that you have, and Diamond has acquired a lot of things over the years. So I think they've already read about Diamond UK Alliance, perhaps even Diamond Select becoming sold off to the highest bidder. And again, those are aspects of the company that I still have friends that work at Diamond. Like when I do go to shows, I see them, you know, and if they're not part of Diamond, I mean, Diamond Select bought up like Gentle Giant and Asylum, was it
Yeah,
Asylum
Art
Toys or something?
Asylum, Art
Art
Asylum.
Asylum, that's right.
Yep,
So like I remember when those were just when I was writing for Toy Fair, those were regular companies on their own that became part of Diamond, so
yep.
now they're going to be their own thing. So I heard a rumor like McFarlane's considering like buying the Diamond Select toys. I don't know if that's true or if that's just a
I
bullshit
hadn't
rumor.
heard that, but that would kind of rather him than NECA.
It's like a sneaky way to get like the Marvel license too. You know what I mean? Like
True. And he's
he
already
can put out
doing those
Marvel Select.
statues, you know,
Right,
so
right.
okay.
Yeah, but this won't be a Marv. I have my issues with McFarlane toys. I'm not gonna go there right now. But I just scale, Todd. Just
Yes.
learn scale is all.
I wasn't on board. Like I quit when Mattel lost the license because like I'm not doing 7 inch, you know.
Yeah.
But then he got the DC animated stuff, and I was like,
Mhm.
okay, so you got me back. But he makes them cheaper than DC did, like quality wise. So now they're
Yeah.
just in the package.
They just fall apart. They just fall
Yeah,
apart.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm a sucker for anything DC. So I was like, yeah, I was with you when Mattel lost the multiverse license. I was like, fuck McFarlane. And
yep,
actually, I was pretty good at holding off for a long time because I bought the first Action Comics 5000 Superman and the Detective 1000 or Action 500 Superman, Detective 1000 Batman. Hated both figures. Got rid of both of them. Now they're going for like, you know, $100 on eBay. I'm like, shit. I think I
yep.
sold it for like $15.
The
Could have
trick
held.
is the trick is just don't open them because like
Yeah.
I'm not a like mint and box collector. It's just that I
Mhm.
have a backlog, and I find that like over time, if I haven't gotten to it, just flip it. 'Cause,
Yeah.
like, it's worth more than I paid, and I wasn't in love with it to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, but where he get, I'm a sucker for like movie figures. Like that's my Marvel Legends are all MCU. I'm that guy. I'm the one Marvel Legends collector that only collects MCU. You know this. You've helped me find some.
Oh yeah, that was me. And then I was like, okay, it's like that scene in The Jerk where it's like, I just need this chair and this lamp. It was like it was MCU. It was like, okay, Ultimate Marvel. Okay, I'll let the X-Men in until like COVID, and I discovered Mercari.
Yeah,
Ooh, that was bad.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
so
yeah.
then I had to institute this rule of like, I'm not buying anyone I've never heard of. Because
Right.
you know they got real obscure after a while of like,
Well, that's kind of
I
why I stuck with MCU. I'm like, okay, the MCU, but even the MCU started like when they started doing Disney Plus figures. I was like, fuck, I gotta
yeah,
back out. But yeah, the McFarlane got me when they started doing movie Batman figures. So I
yep,
got all the Batman. You can see the Batman
I
Forever
can see
figures and
them.
everything. So like, yeah, and as much as I hate myself every time I buy it, but that's the and we were talking about the sentimentality of like if your house burns down, no matter how rich you are, there are priceless collectibles, that I feel like, I would mourn all of this stuff you see behind me more than, some other thing, like the money I would lose or whatever. You know what I
Right,
mean? So like
right,
there's
right.
we have a different understanding of like sentimentality, I guess.
It's the stories attached, you know? It's like I found this figure under the floor panel at Target right as they, right before close.
Yeah. Because someone else hit it there and they're like, fuck, when they came the next morning, I
Right,
hit it right
right.
under the floor panel. Will got me.
Yep.
Um, so let's kind of like get into how Diamond got here. Because as you said, we had been fielding these speculations from jump about one day Diamond's gonna go under. And I thought like when digital comics came out, like when Comixology first came out, I was like, ooh, that's a harbinger of death because if people don't have to buy floppies anymore, and like who buys floppies anymore? Like there's the collectors, like the comic book audience. Like we're probably the youngest comic book collectors because I feel like people younger than us either they read manga, which isn't affected by this because like the manga and graphic novel sales are probably the only consistent thing that's and at the bookstores, not the comic books. Even at comic book stores, I think they sell trades and graphic novels and manga more than they sell floppies. I don't know. I don't have the ICV2 numbers, but I know that that's a healthy part of the hobby. That's a different beast than like the Wednesday Warriors.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like, those prices have just gone up. And people love to talk about, like, oh, well, everything's gone up. I always felt that, like, publishers pushed too far too soon. Like, they
Mhm.
Gwenpooled it. Like, they pushed it harder than we wanted. Because right now, there are there are monthly books that are $7.99.
Yeah.
There are publishers you can say like, "Oh, it's a slick product," but distillery books are 8 to 9.99 per issue. And I'm just like, I get this as a boutique collectible, but I approach everything as cost benefit analysis. For me to buy one distillery book takes 2 to 3 Marvel or DC books out of that week's budget.
Mhm.
So like that's what we're dealing with as a hobby, and it didn't have to be that way. There are people out there showing us you can still do 290. There's still 299 image books out there.
Mhm.
There are still 399 books that are fewer and far between, but you've got the big guys charging that. So then when you get smaller publishers who are like, "Oh yeah, this comic is like 5.99," it's like, dude, it's black and white. Like, why would I? And that's where I feel I never thought digital was gonna do it because retailers were scared that it was gonna like hurt them, and no one could come up with like a common standard.
Mhm.
But I did think Kickstarter was gonna change the game, and it kind of
Mhm.
has
Mhm.
because there are a lot of indie comics that never would have met Diamond's benchmark that
Right.
have found their audience through Kickstarter. For people who don't know, Diamond had like a limit to basically like when I was there, your book had to be able to make like I want to say 2,500 per issue, and that's like cost. That's without all the discounts and all that. Like you had to basically guarantee them you had a product that could make them $2,500, and they would put it in previews for marketing purposes. And then you get it down to like retailers get a discount on it, Diamond gets a discount when they cut you that purchase order, and that's like the business side of things. But there were so many books that could not do that. And you would get indie creators on like message boards talking about how like Diamond had killed their dream. Like that's what I took away from that job. Like I went into it with this excitement of like it's an honor to work in this industry and like just to be around comics. But when I left, I felt like a dream crusher because I can't look back on that era and point to any success that I had a hand in. There were things I was around. There were people who were already slated for success through no influence of mine. It's like I was there doing like the Scott Pilgrim movies, like fervor. Like the series wasn't even done yet. I worked with Jeff Parker back when he was doing indie stuff, you know? But like there's no creators like, oh yeah, I discovered like Jim Lee, you know? Like I don't have that story. Like I have like cocktail party stories of like, hey, sometimes we would get these submissions from prison where they just sketched on like notebook paper and it was a really bad sketch, you know, things
Right,
like
right,
that.
right.
But like it's those creators that couldn't have made the 2500 if they're great at social media or have like a big friend base or they work at like let's say a college, like they have exposure. Those books were created and survived in their own way without needing Diamond and without needing that exposure. So I felt that changed the game even now, you know, because a lot of people thought that like Diamond was like getting like a prestigious grant. Like, oh, I got in previews. Next thing you know, I'm gonna be joining Image. And it's like, no, like you do your own marketing. People
Yeah.
never understood that. Like if you're marketing once the thing comes out in previews, you're already too late. Like
Oh
you were
yeah.
supposed to be building that grassroots fan base, and there's no class for this. There's no like nobody was writing books about this. Like there was a time when I first left where I was like, you know, there's a market for like consulting, but it always felt kind of like, how do you charge for this? What is like then you look at like I have no success to my name. You know, it's like
Right,
I
right,
didn't
right, right.
cultivate anyone's career, but that's what happened. It's like Kickstarter really did put a dent in a lot of things because it's just direct to consumer.
Yeah. Well, and I will say, I mean, I think there maybe you didn't have a direct hand, but I think there were small press folks who their only foothold was because, and this was not pre-internet, but pre-Kickstarter. I think
Yeah.
you're right. The Kickstarter allowed them to have a different venue, but I think you could find a couple of small press folks who would say Diamond getting into previews was the leg up to get them in the industry. But I will say just real quick to circle back about like understanding how marketing and because I worked in marketing comms at Diamond for previews and comic books is different from even like the traditional book market. When my guys and I did Secret Identities and we got in previews, I was telling our publisher, who was at the time, they weren't a small press publisher, but they were like they published like left wing books for college students kind of thing. So like they didn't even know how to market books regardless. They're like they Studs Terkel and the Howard Zinn books. It's like now we're talking about comic books, but whatever. But I tried to tell, like, we were in like the March previews, but the book didn't come out till November or something like that. Or I guess that's not right. August. What is like a 3 month
3 months,
gap.
yeah.
So like we were in the August previews, but the book didn't come out in November, whatever. And I was like, we need to be doing press now in August when the book's in previews so that retailers can order it. And they're like, but the book doesn't come out for 3 more months. You know what I mean? It's
Right,
just like,
right, right.
you don't understand. Comics is different. Anyway, um, but yeah, I think Kickstarter being, like direct to consumer is a big deal because like again, we're tossing some terminology people may not be recognizing. Previews was this big ass catalog that shipped out from Diamond every month that had all the books that you could order in that catalog that retailers would order for the books to ship a couple months later, and that's just how the business worked. And if you were in previews, that means retailers could order your book. And like I remember being in a comic shop that let you look at the comic the previews and say I want to pre-order this, but that's not how a lot of like retailers worked either. Like consumers didn't really touch it wasn't necessarily a consumer facing publication, even though you could if you wanted. That wasn't how comics worked. You would just ask your local comic shop to pull the books that you wanted, and you bought it directly from them. You never bought anything directly from Diamond.
Previews is an interesting beast in that like it's a monthly catalog. It's a huge catalog. It's basically like at its height, it was a local phone book.
Yeah,
You know,
the
which is
size
funny
of one.
because like the phone book people work downstairs, you know, like we're printing the same size, like, but like it was a phone book. And because it followed phone book kind of like order, it's alphabetical. So like you got all these new publishers trying to game the system where it's like, oh, make sure it starts with an A.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
so you get a
If
bunch
you
of like
notice that like all these indie publishers all start with, like Antarctic or Advent or whatever, it was always an A.
we actually I had a publisher that realized this late. They were an M, and then they tried to rename themselves by calling themselves like AA plus, then their name, so they could move. And like Diamond caught wind, they're like, we're not doing this. He's like, but that's my new legal name. It gets ugly. But yeah, like the weird thing though is like they charge money for previews, even though this is a necessary tool for like consumers and the retailer. So previews cost like $6 every month, right? But like you were saying, there's some shops that will just like open it up and let you see. There's some shops now where they will give it free to subscribers just so
Mm.
like they know what's coming. The big deal though is like it was never really digital even after like people left print behind. Like it's still in print. And
Yeah.
for like as long as I can remember, even when we were there, and that was like over 15 years ago for me, like people would say, why isn't this like a PDF? Why isn't this online somewhere? But it's like, no, you get this print catalog, you know? So that was just, and I always laugh at the fact that I made this catalog. I helped put it together month
Mhm.
by month. I have never used it. In my entire fandom spanning 30 years, I have never looked through previews, made a list, and handed that to a retailer.
Who
So
does though? That's the thing. That's such a
even making it, I don't believe it.
yeah. But those diamond codes are iconic, right? It's like the first three letters of a month and like random numbers behind it, like
Yep, yep.
FEB 09645 or whatever. Yeah.
It was
Final cutoff
crazy.
dates, all that kind of stuff. We had to put all that stuff in previews.
Well, it was one thing when they were just kind of like internal, but then there was this shift, like I would say late 2000s, early 2010s, when like publishers started putting that in their marketing
In the
materials.
marketing, right, right.
And that was strange because it's like, I get it, it makes it easier for the retailers, but those codes were like, that's my language. That's not your language.
Yeah, and then just to pull the curtain back a little bit more, like on the marketing side, we had like Dateline and Daily and like all these, which like Daily was like over the internet, like email,
Yes.
PDF, but Dateline was also like an insert that you put into the or that came out weekly or something. I mean, it's just it is kind of like an archaic business if you really sit and think about it, and that's also one of the reasons why they probably will not be long for the world unless they adapt and innovate and become. But I think this is, as someone we talked earlier about being collectors. I think you and I also share a passion for physical media, and I think this is another kind of example of the death of physical media because like you know you're talking about printing previews, but just the idea of like comic books, the physical. I know we said digital comics weren't the disruptor that people predicted, but at the same time people aren't buying, even like I say, younger generations aren't buying floppies. They're barely buying graphic novels and trades, you know. So like do they even care about comic books? Because I'll say this about, Marvel was the like crossed into the mainstream more than ever over the last 15 years because of the MCU. But Marvel comic book sales did not change because of the MC. As you saw, like random jocks wearing, Captain America t-shirts, and it was bigger than Batmania ever was when we were kids in the 80s. Like random folks know who fucking Iron Man is. Just people don't understand how weird that is to people like me and you. Iron Man was not mainstream. You had to be a nerd to know Tony Stark. But now everyone knows who he is. People would dress up as Groot for Halloween, and yet comic book sales did not change. I will give James Gunn, if I give James Gunn any credit, the one credit I will give him is that when he took over DC, at least you saw comic books at the end of all the trailers. Not that it helped sales, but they acknowledged these stories come from comics. As big as superheroes are, even though we're maybe facing superhero fatigue, why did that never translate into people going into comic shops and buying comic books?
I think it was they don't have at least in the beginning, they didn't have people who understood both sides, like the Hollywood side and the publishing side. Because I think the biggest example of being caught with their pants down was the first X-Men movie. There was no corporate synergy between that movie and what was going on at Marvel Comics. And like Marvel was in a healthier place. They were about to launch like the Max line for mature readers. They were doing the Ultimate line. They were about to have Grant Morrison on X-Men. But at the time of that movie, in the comics, you had the return of Chris Claremont, who is not for newcomers. Like that was nobody understood things that we have now, where it's like, oh, you look in previews and you're like, oh, there's like 4 more Superman books coming this summer. Well, that's because the movie's coming. It's like you have to ride that wave. So I think over time they cultivated that, where it's like the comic guys, they become chief creative officers and they dip their toes in both waters. But at the end of the day, no one cares about the books, because I don't think a lot of care is being put into them. I always
Mhm.
had this theory that like you can really only be a fan for about 15 years because of the cyclical nature of things.
Mhm.
Like they're bringing back Age of Apocalypse and they kill Superman again and all this stuff. And you're like, but I saw this. But they're trying to go for the people who haven't seen it. But the sad thing is the only people who care are the ones who have seen it.
Right, right.
So it's like I say that comics really only exist now because it's low cost marketing for the IP. Like
Absolutely.
it keeps the IP relevant, but like people don't understand. Like you were saying how no one knew Tony Stark. Like the entire MCU were all B and C listers
Yeah,
because
at
Marvel had
best.
sold off the rights to the popular ones. But like people are like, no, everyone knows Captain America. They knew him, they didn't care.
Right.
Anything that was part of Heroes Reborn was a loser title, which is why they were willing to do that. you
Right,
know?
right, right, right.
So like right now though, you tell the person on the street, like Marvel Comics makes no money for DC. And DC makes no money really for Warner Brothers. Like
Mhm.
it makes money. It's money we would love to live off of, but in the grand scheme of things, comics just keep these things relevant.
And
But
honestly, over the last couple years, the superhero movies don't make money for Warner Brothers either.
true. They're trying. They're trying. But
Mo- the most money they made is a tax break for canceling Batgirl.
but I mean, for better or worse, with Zachary Levi, more people know Shazam.
Yeah.
Like, which is weird because like if you went back like 60 years, more people knew Shazam than like the Flash,
Well,
So it's like
so many people knew Shazam. DC was like, we got to buy that motherfucker because people are
right,
going to start confusing him with Superman.
right, right,
Um,
right.
yeah. So I think to your point about like the synergy, again, shout out to Diamond because Free Comic Book Day was all Diamond Comics idea. I think I forget the name of the retailer came up with it, but
It
Diamond
was Joe
op
Field flying he was the guy who started Comics Pro basically.
right,
But it was
but
Joe
but but
Field.
Diamond operationalized FCBD to be nationwide and to tie it into that first weekend in May, which I think the first was Spider-Man 2 when that came out was the first Free Comic Book Day, if I recall correctly. And the point was to kind of capitalize. Okay, these movies are huge deals now. Let's make a holiday basically
Yep.
that typically ties into that first big superhero movie where you go to a comic book store and all the publishers have printed, free versions of their best comic for that year. And the idea was to like get people into the hobby because I think the other barrier to entry I honestly think is like people like us, like fanboys for whatever reason do not like new fans and how to appeal to new fans, and we like to gatekeep what we knew when we were 12 and forget that like we want new 12-year-olds to get into the hobby if we want it to sustain, and we try to keep it from. That's why I think you and I think our entry into hobbies is more toys than comics. I think you and I share that. I feel that way about toys too. Like action figures, you go to a toy aisle, I see more 40-year-olds browsing the toy aisle than 4-year-olds, you know?
And they're
And
the only ones buying those Motu figures. If anyone's buying them at all.
and you know, because I do worry about that because again, kids that when we were 8 years old buying toys are playing video games. They're scrolling on Snapchat or TikTok and they're not buying toys, just like they're not reading comic books. What I mean, both of us are parents. I mean, you have younger kids than I do. Like 30, I used to wonder, like 30 years from now, what are they going to be nostalgic for? Because all the toys and the stories, they're all like recycled versions of the stuff we grew up with.
Yeah. Yeah, we are a generation that doesn't know how to let go, and it frightens me because we try to impose what we liked on this younger generation and they just don't care. And
Mhm.
there's certain concepts that could work if updated. Like I've been saying for years, why is G.I. Joe still fighting Cobra? It's just kind of like that means something to me. That didn't mean anything to a kid who was born after 9/11, where you can't even just throw terrorists around. It's just like you gotta change these things. But I mean, kind of like I was saying that I went to college to work in toys. My focus was on like childhood development because I felt like if I know these different stages, I can make this crap educational. That's not how it works. They just want an awesome looking toy and then work backwards. Like, how can we claim this as educational? But one thing that like surprised me that like is like cocktail party conversation for me, the notion of childhood as we know it is very young.
Mhm.
Like we read all these like books and stuff of like way, way long ago. Yeah, if you get into the different classes, like rich people had childhood, they were sheltered, but like a middle class, low class concept of childhood is not that old. Like children were just little adults. Like you send them to the factory, they go to the public executions in the town square. Like that's what it was. Like this whole coddling of like, let's make toys for them for that are priced that anyone can have them. We're talking like Mr. Potato Head when you're sticking plastic parts in a real potato
Mhm.
on up to like things peaked in the 80s and 90s, but I'm scared we're like maybe childhood's over.
Mhm.
Because even like we can say kids like the computer games and the video games and stuff, that's aging them.
Oh
Like
yeah.
even though it's entertaining and it's targeted towards them, like my 9-year-old is basically 15 and I hate it. And
Yeah,
it's
no.
like that's not an isolated like it is they are older than they need to be or than we were at that point in time.
100%. I mean, my daughter, she's a high school senior. She's graduating this year, but she does her job is to work at the after school daycare for the elementary school next, nearby. And those kids are like 6, 7 years old, first graders, second graders, but they all got iPhones, and like not the small iPhone, not the minis. They got like a freaking iPhone 16 Pro Max,
Yep.
bigger than their body, and wearing the Ultra Apple Watch. You know what I mean? And doing the makeup tutorials that they see on YouTube, and you know what I mean? Like they're 7, but to your point, they look like they're 20 because they got all the makeup and the jewelry and the technology. They're all doing the selfie pose. You know what I mean? Like it is definitely, and to your point, like there's a loss of innocence because they're not playing with like dolls or toys. They're and the boys are just as bad, right? They all got they're all playing Call of Duty at 6 years old, and they're all like calling each other motherfucker and bitch and
Yep.
everything. You know what I mean? Like they're all watching Andrew Tate. It's sad.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you're mentioning like the phone, like the top of the line technology. We were getting mugged for sneakers. You know, like it's such a like
But yeah,
different
they were wearing
kind
like
of
$300 Air Jordans, and they're like 12 years old. You know what I
like if
mean?
I found a Charlotte Hornet starter thing in Marshalls, that was like finding gold. But like, so I'm I'm worried not just for like there is the whole like, oh, what's gonna happen to the toys and the comics, but what's just gonna happen to society? And like because things are cyclical, hopefully it comes back. But that could be like boy bands, you know? That's like 30 years, 50 years down the line. So I
Yeah.
don't it's but back to comics, like I think this was a reckoning that needed to happen across the industry because it's not just about Diamond, and that's what I've kind of been laughing about with the whole Ding Dong the Witch is Dead, because a lot of these retailers don't seem to understand they're going with it. You know,
Oh yeah.
like that's a point that a lot of people don't know because retailers aren't forthcoming about it. It's not something you boast about, but a lot of people don't understand how many retailers Diamond helped financially. Diamond acted kind of like a bank, like a non-predatory check cashing place in that like they floated a lot of struggling retailers, the same retailers talking trash
Yeah.
about online.
I mean, again, it probably wasn't best business practice, to be honest. You know what I mean?
No.
And there's a reason they're in debt is because, as you said, you brought up the mid '90s. Like when the comics market crashed, comic book stores stayed open because of Diamond.
Yes. Yes.
And I think a lot of people kind of bit the hands that fed them, and that's where we are now. You know. But again, I'm not here to like shit on retailers. I think some retailers had, you know, valid complaints, like if something got shipped late or was damaged. Sure, that happens in any business. Like half the shit I get from Amazon, it comes damaged.
Yep.
you know, but I think to your point, I think there is a lack of understanding or compassion for the people who make up like the Amazons and the Diamonds and everything. Like, yeah, Jeff Bezos is evil. Say what you will about Steve Jeppy, but but like there are other people in the tiers below the CEO who are not responsible for the venom I'm sure you got on the phones and vice versa. So
On the phones in person. The minute somebody heard you work for Diamond, they think you're customer service or that you can do something about it. It's like, tell them to stop double shipping my dude. I don't even know where that warehouse is located, because it was like Mississippi at one point, then it moved like in the yeah, it I don't know.
and it's funny too because I think part of like my naivete when I left Diamond and like kind of seeing like the vitriol that just the name Diamond Comics imposes on a lot of people is that I worked on the DVD side and I worked on like the school library side. And that was a whole different world because I
Yes.
remember one year was it ALA or it was one of those book trade shows. It wasn't Comic-Con. And I assumed that I would have to like make the case for comics, but like the schools and libraries were like, "We love you." And it was like we were like welcome, like like we were welcome as liberators. They were throwing roses at our feet. Me and Alan Greenberg were just like basking in the glory of adoration because they understood. You were talking about using toys as education. Comics was a good gateway to reading for kids, and they loved us. And so like the school library side was so different from like the retailer side as far as like
Oh yeah, because
understanding.
DVD was smart in that all of their executives came from like the book world, which
Mhm.
was just more respected. That's why like Target puts book talk in their circular. They don't put
Yeah.
comic talk in their so it's just the book world. I mean, we had Jana from Scholastic.
Yeah.
There was Koo. There was
Yeah.
it's like we had that one guy like who worked for like
Scott.
Borders. Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. So it was just kind of like these people had reputations. So it was kind of one of those deals of like, I don't really care what they're bringing us. They have this storied reputation. They've done right by me in the past. I'm gonna try it out. So it
Yeah.
was like that's why that's still thriving. Dave Pilkey doesn't have to worry about all this that's going
Right, right,
on.
right, 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 right,
Like
right.
it's two different animals.
Yeah. So I mean, it's definitely like the comics industry is going to look different going forward. Whatever Diamond becomes out of this bankruptcy, you know, we may see more store closures. I mean, again, I don't know how you're going to see more store closures considering that, like, I don't think any small comic shop is still around, to be honest, like post COVID. Like the bigger stores are still around, but those small mom and pop comic shops, at least where I live in Baltimore, there's not as many as there used to be.
There's not during COVID, I found this old like comic shop locator like list of comic shops, and I was like when they started lifting restrictions and we didn't have to go back to work, I made like a scavenger hunt of like let's go just go visit every store in like the tri-state area because whatever, and like that list it got chopped
Yeah.
during that span of time, and even now it's like if you have more than one location you survived, but like you
Mhm.
were saying if you're that one location store, because especially in the Baltimore area I know like four that closed in the last like 2 years,
Yeah.
so it's rough, and not everybody is a Midtown or a Third Eye or a
Right.
Golden Apple, but like it's gonna be hard. And I stopped by one in Reisterstown. He's not paying you, so I'm not shouting him, but it's an awesome store. And he was talking about this. This was the other day. And like he had some ideas on like what could help Diamond out of this situation. But the problem is it would require buy-in from retailers. And right now, it's that situation of the only vocal people are the anti-Diamond people. So it's like we kind of gotta hope that there's this silent majority out there that would maybe like they understand that Diamond is a necessary part of this industry. I just hope somebody finds them in time,
Yeah.
because I mean, basically Domino's apparently sitting on all this merchandise in the warehouse that they own, but they don't know what to do with it. So it's kind of like he was saying that like you convince a retailer like, hey, if you buy this pallet of items for like 5 grand or whatever, yes, that is a lot, but if it doesn't work out for you, we send you 5 grand more that you don't pay for, and we throw in X, Y, and Z. It turns back into that like old school barter system because they got to make up that 31 million somewhere.
Mhm.
But it's achievable if you think of like right now, apparently there are like roughly 2,100 stores in North America. So like you do that math, it wouldn't take much, but it's gonna require people to understand this is more serious than haha the monopoly's over, and understand that this affects more than just like comics in timonium,
Right.
like this is your future. This is because what's it gonna take for Marvel and DC to just realize like, hey, this ain't worth it. We could just make a Batman cartoon to remind people, like one we actually care about, we don't sell off to Amazon.
Well,
Like,
yeah, I mean, I think that there's something to be said about, like, not everyone is Marvel and DC, right? And they got Warner Brothers and Disney behind them. Like, you think about the booms and the images and the the other the kind of like mid tier comic book and companies that don't rely on the kind of like IP funnel from
right.
comic book to movies to TV. And even then, like, we were saying, just because you make TV shows, you could hire like all of these comic book writers to be in your writers room, but that's never gonna translate to something successful. Because like the thing people always often forget, like I remember when Netflix bought like Millar World, and it was like no one gives a shit about those properties.
Yep.
Like you paid all this money because you wanted your own superhero, thing, but and not everything's the boys either. Like that kind of took off and became a thing of its own from a kind of niche comic book. Even Walking Dead was a huge seller, but like it wasn't, not everything will translate. It's kind of like a shot in the dark,
And
honestly. And
everything has an ending. I mean, AMC's throwing money at the Walking Dead franchise just so like they don't go out of business. But really,
right.
that was done a decade ago.
Yeah.
It's that kind of deal. And like the Millar World deal where it's like you get everything except kick ass.
Right.
So it's like
The only thing that actually took off, right,
right,
right.
right. So I mean, you're right. Like it's gonna be rough for the IDWs, which they already have their issues, and the like booms, and that I think they might pivot, maybe focusing hardcore on book, like for the
Mm.
trades and things like that. I've heard there are a lot of companies right now that are, they're even kind of like emailing retailers directly saying like, hey, with everything going on, you can just order from us directly right now,
Yeah,
which is a
yeah,
violation of contracts and everything. Like, things are gonna get crazy as we like think outside the box and figure out how to save things. I just feel it's in everyone's best interest for a diamond in some form to survive.
yeah. I mean, and just to touch back on the book thing, like it goes back to what I said earlier. Like manga is still thriving in the comics market, and I just wonder what are they doing right? Like the Vizes and the it's not even Viz and Tokyo Pop anymore. Like there are so many other manga publishers that are still selling. And the thing about manga is that like unlike the like you said the $5 floppy, you get like this thick collection of comics, and there's even though it's a thick like 100-page book, there's like 50 volumes of
Yep.
it. And they still sell. So they're doing something correct. What can the American comic book industry learn from how the manga publishers and distributors are able to not only sell their wares but like retain a fandom that is continually buying the books on top of all the other merch? Because I think what the superhero comic publishers, they rely on the merch, not necessarily the comics. You see a bunch of Captain America t-shirts and toys. You don't see a lot of Captain America comic books.
Right, right.
So
And I think there's a lot to be said from the like manga model in the sense of like it's almost like penny pinching. Don't have to worry about paying a colorist, things like that. Then it comes down to like, what kind of printers are they using? And are these printers that specialize in that like digest form? Because that's
hmm
been a big issue with before the diamond thing of how are publishers going to weather the tariff situation, in that most of the quality printers are going to be in China. I mean, for comics, there are the Canadian ones that's still going to be
it's still a
affected,
tariff. Yeah.
but it's also like they are giving premium product for floppies. When you're changing the like the scale and the size and the production of it, like I don't know if Quebecor, do they even exist anymore, could do a manga-esque book. You know what I mean? It's like you would have to change the format. I felt that if we went to the European model,
hmm
even in Europe, they have albums. So
Right,
it's like
right.
you're not getting monthly X-Men, you're getting maybe quarterly X-Men, but it's basically prestige format and it's 3 months worth of what America got, So it's just like, maybe it's not reprinted material. That's how we get things, but you got to make the price make sense better over here.
Yeah.
We're
And I wonder, and
getting
I
the
know we've been
premium.
going on and on about it, like I wonder what is the real true barrier? Is it price? Is it format? Is it story? Because we talked also about like how comic stories are so cyclical, or even when you try to innovate, you have like older fans like just refusing to accept any kind of innovation in the storytelling, right? Like, you know, so like what where is the I mean, and that's the $64,000, or I guess in this case $41 million question is what is the thing that's keeping, or do we, to your point, have to let it go and just understand comics as we know it in 10 years, which people have been saying every 10 years comics as we know is going to go away, but maybe we this is the first domino, and comics as we know it is truly going away.
Well, it's that sliding timeline like in Marvel. You know how like Marvel's always 11 years old?
Yeah.
So it's like it's always 10 years. I think price is a big factor. Is definitely a big factor in that, like, if comics if the floppy costs almost or as much as a trade, there's a problem.
Yeah.
Like, most Image Volume 1 trades are 9.99 because it's the whole like, let's get them in the door and then we can increase the price. But then trades are, they are eligible for like Amazon discounts, things like
Mhm.
book market things, so
Right.
you're never paying retail. But like back to distillery, that's $9.99 a month for 3 to 4 months per issue. And
Yeah.
then they're gonna sell it collected for 30. Whereas it's like you didn't even get like I don't get any discount by waiting for the trade, but I also don't get more content by buying monthly. So
Right.
it's all about like somebody's gonna have to do the numbers. I think it comes down to if comics were like $1 and they were in more places, now sure you can't pay your bills on $1, but then it becomes a volume situation. Like
Right.
maybe you're not printing a monthly Black Lightning book. Like let's be serious here. Like like I admire what you're trying to do, DC. Black Lightning will not see 12 issues. So we got
Well,
to be
again, the
realistic.
audience with a shrinking audience too. That's the other thing that has like, should we invest in trying to grow that audience or what? You know what I mean? Like, I'm throwing out all these questions. I don't have answers for any of them. You know what I mean?
Well,
Because like,
I think finding that audience is important, and maybe they're not utilizing the best channels. Like you're talking about the manga. I don't know of any established kind of official thing that promotes and talks about the manga. Like we don't have the print magazines, but I'm sure there's like a bunch of prominent YouTubers and streamers and things like that, and that's why people know about this. And that doesn't even cost as much money
yeah,
as the money these publishers are spending on things that aren't working. So they
right.
need to like modernize their efforts, but I don't know anyone in the industry who's younger than us. Even the ones who
We're the
are
young ones.
aren't.
Is the scary part.
It's like even the ones who are, it's like they still were raised by that uncle who was giving them like Silver Age comics. So I just like there's no youth in the industry. They're all the social media guys where it's like they might hop on a trend to promote something, but then
Right.
that's dead when the next trend comes along.
Right. Well, and that's the thing too. Like when you chase young people, is it worth it? Because to your point, like so many things don't last in what young people are into. Like it could be the real hot thing for a month, but that's not sustainable either, you know? Because like I think you're right. We can't recapture the 80s. There was something unique about the 80s that when something latched on to 12-year-olds or whatever, we just we're just the Generation X, elder millennials. We're the ones who, for whatever reason, clommed onto pop culture and refused to let go. And I think pop culture is much more ephemeral to younger people than it ever was before. And maybe because it's so omnipresent, you know, older generations, boomers, Gen Xers, elder millennials, it was more fleeting, so we had to hold on to it. But
Right.
now it's everywhere. And our stuff is everywhere, their stuff is everywhere, boomer stuff is still everywhere. So like there's just so much stuff. And the internet has opened it up to everyone. Because we used to have to find things. You don't have
Yes.
to find things anymore.
I
It's in
remember
your
things
phone.
that had one website. Like there were topics where it was like, this is the one GeoCity site that you can find info on this show.
I mean, yeah, like we're two dinosaurs talking because you and I still run blogs. Like
Yeah, yeah,
no
yeah.
one cares about blogs. You and I are plugging away. It doesn't matter.
I think one thing that would really help, and like legally it's a problem, I get it, but they have to embrace collab culture because that's really what the youth skew towards. It's like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
they got Mr. Beast in my Superman,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
old fans would rail against that, but
Mm-hmm.
it comes down to do we stand to gain more new fans than we lose of the old fans? Like there was always that joke of like who wins between Superman and the Hulk? The fans.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's how you keep your stuff relevant and sell your books. You can't cling on to continuity as much, and that kills writing for the trade, but you still make a shit ton of money because hey, people are interested. And like I was only half joking with the Mr. Beast thing. Like there are a lot of people who would hate that, but there are a
Yeah,
lot of people who would check it out.
at least,
You
yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a new world. I mean, we're literally living in the future. It's 2025. I mean, I never thought I know what 2025 was going to look at. And apparently, 2 weeks into it, looks like shit.
Yep,
2025.
I thought it'd look better than this. My car's still on the
I was
ground.
going to say, remember Avery Brooks? Where are my flying cars?
Right?
Yeah. Many more things to worry about than lack of flying cars. Any last words you for your diamond eulogy before we wrap up?
I just like it was a very important part of my life, which is why I still like stick up for it, you know?
Mm,
And it was important to see how the sausage was made. Like when I was done with Diamond, and I didn't have like this huge stint. I did like roughly 2 years, but I felt I had seen it all. Like when I
mm,
came back from San Diego, I was done. Like it was like I always thought going to San Diego would be like going to Mecca, like it'd be this like
mhm,
religious experience, but it was too much. It was like
mm.
coming back from a Vegas bender with no money and you're divorced. And I just like so it took me a while to kind of come back around to all of it, but like I still know the importance Diamond has in this industry. I don't think it's what people think it is. You know,
Yeah.
like I don't think it intended to be a monopoly. When
Right.
it made its play to lock in DC, that was so it could survive.
Right.
People look at how they acquired the smaller distributors in the early 90s. They're like, "Oh, they're trying to be number 1." I honestly don't think that's the case. I think they just wanted to survive.
Mm,
And by default and other factors, they ended up number 1. So I think Diamond would be the first to tell you that they don't want to be a monopoly. You know, like they
yeah.
want to survive and do well, but like competition's good for everyone. And even just at our base level, we all want to be liked. So it's like we all know how people feel about Diamond. If there were a way to be successful and still be liked, that would be the preferable thing. So like I hope they emerge from this strong and healthy, but like you said, I don't know what the future of this industry looks like. But like I'm sure you can relate. I got more than enough to keep me busy till I die if it does go away tomorrow. So it was a good ride.
Yeah. I mean, I'm probably part of the problem. I've like haven't really followed. I mean, I follow comics. I don't really read comics anymore
Who
because
does?
it's too much. It's too much, you
Oh
know.
yeah, I'm double dipping. I'm buying by the month and then I buy the trade, but I don't read. I haven't read regularly since my oldest was born. So we're
Yeah.
talking 9 years. I have 9 years of Amazing Spider-Man that I need to catch up on, so they can take a break for a while.
Yeah. I mean, I still like you, I'll buy like you can see a couple hardcovers I have on my shelf. Like I'll still buy and with the intention like I'm going to read I have Ta-Nehisi Coates' Black Panther run that's still sealed and I haven't even cracked open the
Leave
plastic.
it sealed.
I
Have you ever
haven't
watched
even
paint
cracked open.
dry? It's the same thing.
but you know like and I intend to read it. My brother still reads religiously. He still every Wednesday has his pull, his weekly pulls and everything. And I'm like, it's just I'm not that game is left me, man. I'm not there anymore.
It's the
But
ritual though. I go every Wednesday. It's like going to church. Like you
yeah,
talk to the people, you see the regulars.
well,
It's the
there are no shops
barbershop.
near me anymore. That's hard for me to go anywhere Wednesdays. Is the problem too.
Gotcha,
That might be
gotcha.
that might be part of it. But yeah, I mean, and again, my religion is more the action figures, and they've made it easier to buy action. I don't even go on toy hunts anymore. Like,
Oh,
yeah.
they are rough. Like it's nice to get it to show up to your house, but like there's something about finding
Something when I
finding it
do
in
find
that
something in the
aisle.
wild, I mean, even if I don't want it, I'm like, oh shit,
Yep.
I'll buy it. Like,
Like I still strategically go Tuesdays and Thursdays because Tuesday is new day at Target, Thursday is
oh,
clearance day. You
I
know,
should
now I just
remember that.
revealed my secret to
Yeah.
the
Well, I mean, my problem is when I do show up at the Targets or the WalMarts, is like there's just never anything there, and that's the frustrating thing about the
Yeah.
toy hunt. Not I don't I wouldn't say I don't go on toy hunt. I still do. I just they never bear any fruit, and so I feel like I don't go any toy hunts anymore. But like you said, the things I really want, there's nothing that I really want that I don't have.
Right.
And there's something about like there's something satisfying about that, but there's also something a little sad about that because like the thrill of the hunt is part of being a toy collector.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I honestly, like, sometimes I also feel like maybe I need to get rid of some of this stuff.
Oh, I'm there too. Every time I see that like Visa bill, and I'm like, half this stuff is still sealed. So
Well, I mean, and it, like, I open the stuff, and I don't know if you can see it. Like, I got bins. Like, my ritual now is I open it out of the plastic that it comes in, and I just put it in another plastic bag and stick it in a plastic box. Like, why did I do that? What's the it, it takes something for it to be on display, but I'll display some things, but I don't know. It's a condition I need to get seen for because, like, I'll buy it, take it out of the plastic, put another just different plastic,
right. But it's a ritual.
and put it
That's the
away. You can't even
part.
see it is the thing. It's like I have all these bins full of shit that you can't even see. So
Oh, I hear you.
and it was disappointing. I went to a toy show recently, locally, to try to sell some stuff, and I didn't move much product, and I was like, I guess I'm just stuck with this forever.
That's the worst when you have something where it's like I have a bunch of posters because when the Disney movie Insiders ended, I blew all my points on like
Same.
MCU posters. But like you can't really donate a poster because it's rolled. Like
Mhm.
they're hard to ship. So it's like when I started selling stuff on like Marketplace, like here, take all these posters too.
Yeah.
Where it's just
Yeah.
like I didn't want the points to go to waste, but it's like I
Me
have
either.
no walls.
I did the same thing. I did the same thing. I got a bunch of posters and I got a bunch of like lithographs and I got a bunch of Blu-rays too. The Blu-rays were sold real. That was like the funny thing. Same toy show. I'd blown all my points on Blu-rays. Took them to the toy show to try to sell, like, because toy collectors will probably have some physical media
Yeah.
collectors too. And I had these on display and they were like, "Those are all from Disney Insiders, aren't they?" I was like, "How'd you know?"
Like my table's got something.
Because they were all like Disney, Marvel, Star Wars. I was like, yeah. Because I did the blind box basically. You just like 800 points and you get like 4 Star Wars movies. You don't know
Yep.
what they are. And
Yep.
they like threw in some 4Ks too. I was like, wow.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I by the time they started doing blind boxes, I didn't have enough points. So I was like, okay, Dumbo poster it is.
Oh, I held out to the very end. Like, I actually didn't have as many things to choose from. That's why I ended up with like a couple posters and lithographs. But the Blu-ray blind box, I was like, yeah, I don't care. I'll try to sell them.
Right.
And I moved a couple of them, but yeah, I don't. It's life of a collector, man. It's hard in these streets.
It is. It is, especially like knowledgeable ones, because like them knowing those were insiders. Like when I'm selling figures, I gotta make sure. Well, everybody knows this is the Ollie's wave right now, so I can't get anything for this.
I I know you only paid $5.99 for that
Right?
Aquafina figure.
Exactly. So like, so many
That's
things
the
to
other
think
thing,
about.
honestly, and I know we're kind of veering way off topic here, but that's another thing that's kind of like made my toy collecting mojo feel a little bad is that when I go to Ollie's or even like Big Bad Toy Store puts things on discount, I'm like, shit, I paid $25 for that Namor figure, and now it's at Ollie's for $5.99. God damn it!
Yep. Yep.
Like,
I don't buy Legends for retail anymore. Like,
yeah, I've learned.
but even in Joe's too. Like, I was kind of that way with Power Rangers, and Hasbro killed that line. But like with
Mm,
Joe's, you wait out Target. But Target, they changed the game because now like it would go to clearance, but if it sits there long enough, it gets out of the system. But then now it returns to the system at retail.
really?
Yeah, because before it would be like ask a team member and they just throw a price at you. No, it goes back to retail.
Mm.
So like that's no longer an option.
See, Hasbro conditioned me because when Classified first came out, they were so hard to find.
Yep,
Like they just did not. And then forget about the exclusives, the Cobra Island stuff. Like if you found anything at Target, you should buy it just because you'll never see it again.
exactly. And
And so
I
I've been
still
conditioned. If I see a GI Joe on the shelf, unless I don't care for the character, I'll pick it up right away. And
the,
and now I'm stuck with like $35 figures that I don't want.
the distribution is actually better at
Yeah,
GameStop, which is sad
yeah,
because
yeah,
I
yeah.
vowed not to go in there
Because
anymore.
they have that $5 upcharge for being at GameStop too. It's like I don't understand.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, my classified collection is still popping, but I'm scaling back because again, I have nowhere to put them, and I particularly Marvel Legends. I feel like I'll pay 25 for this, and I'm gonna see it for 10 in like 6 months. So
Yeah,
I'm learning my lesson. Slowly but surely, I'm learning my lesson.
we're all learning it.
Yeah, and let's see if Diamond learns theirs. We're gonna wrap up on that point. Will, it's a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for
Yeah.
being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
How can folks find you and your growing empire of Westweek Ever
I'm on
content?
every app at William B. West, even the ones people said they're leaving. And my website is westweekever.com. Every week I post like a weekly wrap up of pop culture. Oh, and I have a podcast. I always forget to mention that. It's called Remember That Show. We've got like 30 episodes at this point where my friend Adam and I look at obscure and forgotten shows from the 80s and 90s. So things like The Critic, you've heard of that. Our last episode though was Designing Women. So we're all over the place. So yeah, check that out too.
Awesome. I am the Real Chow. I'm still on that hellscape called Twitter, _real_Chow. Find me on Blue Sky at Real Chow. I don't really post anywhere, but I'm on all these places. Where you can find posts is the Nerds of Color. So follow at the Nerds of Color. Every platform you can think of, it's the same handle at the Nerds of Color. Go to hardknockmedia.com, NOC for Nerds of Color, to find this podcast and all the podcasts in the Hard Knock family, including the return of DC Multicast, in which I go back and rewatch every single DC movie ever made. Season 2 coming soon at the end of January. We're going to continue season 2. I released the first episode of season 2 back in December because Batman Returns is the ultimate Christmas movie, so we had to do that one on Christmas. The rest of the DC movies start on January 29th with Batman Forever with Dr. Drea Letamendi, Dr. Arkham Asylum. We're going to be talking about Batman Forever and follow all of the DC movies up until 2009's Watchmen. And then we'll see if we can get to season 3 where we cover the Snyderverse. So you got to listen if you want us to get to that. But anyway, follow us there. This is Hard Knock Life. Until next time.
Comics.
Yes. Comics. Excelsior.
Excelsior.
Pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this. This is the Hard Knock Life, but not the chicken kind, more like the people.